You cannot cultivate a rotten apple and make it a good apple. He is beyond the reach of education. There is none that understand him. He is beyond the reach of inspiration. He cannot be altered by soft music. He can sit in church and hear beautiful music, but beautiful music will not change his heart. He is beyond the reach of occupation. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. So man, and that is the first premise of the gospel, man is a sinner. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So the first premise of the gospel is that man is a sinner. Now the second great doctrine of salvation is what we call, what the Bible calls, unconditional election. Unconditional means that God does not require anything for man to do in order to be saved, because God will do it all. Election means the choice of God. So unconditional election is the second great doctrine of salvation that I see in this man. If you notice in verse 5, a certain man was there. A certain man. Not just a man, but a certain man. That's one of God's elect. That's one God chose before the foundation of the world. A certain man. You see, God saves us not by groups or countries or nations. He saves us individually, one by one. There might be a great revival meeting, and 200 people might be saved, but every one of them was saved one by one. God deals with a man one by one. He's a picture of the sovereignty of God and electing grace. And you'll notice that Jesus saw a whole multitude, but he only healed one. This man was no different than any of the others. He did not call out to the Lord. He was not seeking the Lord. The only explanation of his healing is that Jesus came looking for him. And that's how all of us were saved. Jesus came looking for us. He may have brought us into a church to hear the gospel. He may have sent us to a revival meeting. He may have had a neighbor witness to us. But Jesus comes to us. He looks for us, just as he was looking for this man. There was a great multitude there, but Jesus was only interested in this one man. You say, how do you know that? By asking a question. What did he do for all the others? He did absolutely nothing for the others. He healed this man, this certain man, and walked away and never did anything for the others. He's a picture of sovereignty of God. The Bible says he chooses whom he will. And he seeks out his lost sheep and he finds them. That's the only explanation you can make out of this. Ephesians 1:4. According as he hath chosen us. We get the idea sometimes that we chose him. That's wrong. He chose us. The Bible says we love him because he first loved us. He loved me before I loved him. And he loved you before you loved him. According as he hath chosen us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love, having predestinated us under the adoption of children by Jesus Christ, according to the good pleasure of his will. That's the doctrine of divine election. Mark 13:20 says, except the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he hath chosen, he hath shortened the days. Mr. Spurgeon had something to say about that. Mr. Spurgeon said, if there are the elect, then there must have been an election. In John chapter 10 and verse 16, Jesus said, other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them I must bring also, and they shall hear my voice. And see, they're not saved yet, but they're his sheep. And they're going to hear his voice. And to be saved, you have to hear his voice. Not audibly through the ear, but in the heart. You hear him calling you. Now, the elect are sheep before they're ever saved. Before they're ever born again, they were sheep. See, there are two kinds of people in this world. There are sheep and goats. And God divides all people into one of these two classifications, either sheep or goats. For 21 years, I was a sheep, but I was a lost sheep. But I never was a goat. I was lost, wicked, sinful, undone, but I was a sheep, because there came a day when one of God's sheep, lost and undone, went to a revival meeting, and the Lord called him and saved him. That was me. I'm glad I'm one of the Lord's sheep. In John 10:16, I must bring these sheep. They're not saved yet, but he's going to save them. If you're one of God's elect, he is going to save you. And Jesus said in John 10:26 that there were some who were not his sheep. That rules out Arminianism. But ye believe not, Jesus said, he's speaking to the Pharisees, because ye are not of my sheep. As I said unto you, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. Somebody asked a great preacher one time, what about the sheep that don't follow him? He said he doesn't have any like that. My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me. He's going to save his sheep, all of them, without exception. There's a third great truth in relating to salvation, and it's what the Bible calls particular atonement. Verse 21. For as the Father raiseth up the dead, and quickeneth them, the word quickeneth means to make alive, so, even so, the Son quickeneth whom he will. The Son of God quickens, just like the Father does, whom he will. He makes alive whom he chooses to. And this man at the pool of Bethesda was one of the elect. He's one of those that God chose. One of those that Jesus chose to quicken and to make alive. And that's exactly what he did for him. John 10:11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. Notice, not for the multitude, not for the whole world, for the sheep. The good shepherd giveth his life. He died on the cross for the sheep. That is to put away the sin and the punishment of his sheep and to save them with an everlasting salvation. He made an atonement for his sheep. He paid their debt. He settled accounts with God the Father for them. He took care of the problem of their breaking of the law. Now, either God is able to save everyone, or he's not able to save everyone. His omnipotence guarantees that he can save everyone that he chooses to save. Or else, he does not choose to save all. Either he can, or he does not choose to. We know that he can, if he wills to. So evidently, the fact that he doesn't save all is an indication that he does not choose to save all. Jesus did absolutely nothing for all the others. And when I walk down the streets of Chiang Mai, I see the multitudes. I see the crowds. And I say to myself, why did he choose me? These people are all lost. And I can't help but think when I see them, they're all lost. They're all going to hell. Why did he single me out and save me that night? There wasn't anything good in me. There wasn't anything that would commend me to God. I was a blind, proud Pharisee. And yet he had mercy upon me. And he chose me. Chose me before the foundation of the world. If I had known during those 21 years that I was lost, if I had known that I was one of the elect, I would have come to him when I was a little boy. But I didn't know. Nobody ever taught me the Bible. And these things that I'm teaching you this morning are in the Bible, and you don't hear them in hardly any churches today anywhere. But you hear it here because we preach the Bible. And Jesus divides all groups into either sheep or goats. And I read over in the book of Revelation that there's going to be a great judgment day, and he will separate the sheep from the goats. There's a fourth great truth that this man illustrates, and that's the effectual call. The effectual call. Verse 8 and 9. Jesus saith unto him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. Now that's a military commandment. It's a commandment to be obeyed at once. Rise, take up thy bed, walk. And the Greek word is eutherios. It means instantly, right now. I'll give you an illustration of the two kinds of calls. There are two kinds of calls that are both different. Here's the general call. It goes out to everybody. They hear it over the radio, over the television, in the churches. They hear it everywhere. It's called the general call to come to Christ. And we have an illustration of that, of certain disciples of Christ. Doesn't say they're saved, doesn't say they were sheep. They were disciples. That means learners. And Jesus said in John 6, verse 65, Therefore said I unto you, that no man can come unto me, except it were given unto him of my Father. Notice, no man can come to me on his own, of his own will, of his own choice, of his own determination. He cannot. He cannot come from that time, except it were given unto him of my Father. From that time, many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him. They said, Oh, Jesus, that's too much for us. You're too strong for us. If you're going to talk to us like that, we're going to go away from you. And they walked away and walked no more with him. They could not take the truth that he was preaching to them. And that's the truth that I'm preaching to you this morning. The effectual call. That was a general call. But then there's another call. And it's called the effectual call. And the general call never saves anybody. Nobody ever comes to the general call unless he just comes to make a profession, which usually won't last. But the second call is the effectual call. And when the effectual call of the gospel goes out and it's heard by one of his sheep will respond. They will come to him. They will fall at his feet and they will look up into his face and say, Jesus, I come. I need salvation. I need you. And they come. That's the effectual call. Why is it that in a great crowd, sometimes a few will come and the most will not. There was an effectual call that brought the few to the front. And the multitude heard the general call. It didn't do anything for them. There was a man named Zacchaeus. He was crooked. He was stealing from his people. He was overcharging them in their taxes. And he wanted to see Jesus, who he was. He was curious, that's all. And he couldn't, the crowds were lining the street. He couldn't see over anybody's head. He was a little short man. So he climbed up in a sycamore tree, crawled out on a limb, and he looked down. And just as he looked down, Jesus walked underneath that limb and looked up at him and said, "Zacchaeus, come down, for today I must abide at thy house." And he came down and received him joyfully. That's the effectual call. That's the effectual call. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Moreover, whom he did predestinate, that means to choose beforehand, to determine destiny. Whom he did predestinate, them he also called. And whom he called, them he also justified. And whom he justified, them he also glorified. 3 calls there in 2 verses. Salvation is a call from God. It comes through the preacher. It comes through the Bible. It comes through hearing. And when you hear the gospel, how Christ died for sinners, how he was buried and rose again, and how he made a blood atonement